Hello and welcome to a new Junction. In this episode of Under Closer Inspection, we're pitching the Hornby DCC Select on the right hand side against the Gaugemaster Prodigy Express. Both are DCC controllers and both are aimed at the entry level market for DCC. With the Hornby Select, you literally get this controller in a box, just a power pack as an extra. As you can see, it's quite a basic design, fairly self-explanatory. Numbers for functions, numbers for locos, a giant emergency stop button on the top, and a screen just to indicate which loco you've selected or what it's doing. To the rear of the controller, you have your track A and B inputs, an express Ethernet cable to go with the rail link, etc., the 15 volt power input and the 15 volt auxiliary output for things like lights or accessories. Super simple. Now with the Gaugemaster Prodigy you get two parts to this because it's aimed to be a handheld controller. The first part is this power box. The power lead goes in there. You've got 4 ports, 2 for your main track and 2 for your programming track, and then 1 for a booster wire for accessories should you wish to expand. The Gaugemaster controller itself has 1 port on the bottom, which is literally to connect it to that previous box, thus allowing it to be very easily handheld for the sake of 1 wire. This is obviously designed to be handheld because it's small enough to fit, it's very light, and the buttons are all easily accessible. Now I was very lucky to be offered this Gaugemaster Prodigy Express controller to demo for a while and see my thoughts on the controller compared to the Hornby Select, which I've used for the last year and a half. The Gaugemaster I've probably had on use and using it on the layout for the last 3 to 4 weeks and given it a full test. Now all the features I'm going to go into in this video are features which I find important for my layout. I'm not going to go into all the features of each individual controller, but for the main ones that I find I use quite regularly. So let's get them plugged into the layout and see how they handle. So here they are on the layout. First things first, how do they feel to use? Now, if I start with the Select, obviously this is a controller which is designed to be placed down somewhere and used in situ. You'd struggle with one hand to use this controller, or likewise move around. Having the accessory ports and the track ports in the back would make it very difficult to start walking around your layout with this. You'd also struggle to use it with one hand. The Prodigy, however, obviously designed to be used with one hand. It's extremely light, and all the buttons are within a thumb's reach, just like a phone would be. Now the first thing you notice with using both these controllers is their button sensitivity. Now with the Hornby Select, for example, sometimes if you don't press hard enough with the buttons, they don't always register. Now typically on camera, there you go, that one didn't work, number 4 didn't work, number 1 didn't work. You have to really press hard. Luckily the controller's robust enough to take that, but it's not very comfortable to keep doing it. Whereas on the Prodigy, light touches work wonderfully well. When using the two controllers, you do notice that the acceleration wheels, they both have resistance when you turn them, which is a nice feedback. But the Hornby one's the one with the textured edge, which makes it nice and easy just to glide round, whereas the Prodigy doesn't have any texture at all, and is completely smooth, which can often be a pain when you need a fast response. When it comes to programming a new loco, with the Hornby Select, it's very simple. You hold down the select button until it says LA, and then you select the new loco number, and you press select again, and that programs it in. Extremely simple, no other options, and it's job done. The downside, however, is you can only do this when connected to your main layout. So that means every other loco on the railway has to either be disconnected or taken off the track, which on a bigger layout can be of some annoyance. The same thing on the Prodigy, however. You have a separate lead to a programming track, and the simple answer to program a new engine is literally you press the program button on the controller, goes to programming track, you press enter, select the address, which in this case is a 67, press enter, and it sends it to the loco, and away you go. It does give you other options like the starting voltage, the acceleration, the deceleration, and the total voltage, and then you can edit the CVs, therefore, which are really extremely handy and essential for the more realistic modeler. But all in all, the programming on this controller is super easy and very efficient. The trade-off out the box for the Prodigy, having the programming track, is that the Hornby has a auxiliary power port which is doing my lighting. So my station platform lights and my street lamps are all controlled or powered directly from that controller. If you were capable of the wiring on the Select, you could quite easily use some isolating switches and wire up a programming track, and for the sake of switching over where the power went or the signal went to the chips, you could quite happily set up a programming track, but it doesn't come like that out of the box. So in this instance it is a disadvantage, and it's not as easy as the Prodigy. Now both controllers are capable of running multiple trains. Due to the Hornby Select's sluggishness when selecting an engine, it is safer, and I prefer it to run engines on their own loops. So whereas my layout is essentially 3 loops, I would have 3 trains running on 3 separate loops. So worst case, should there be a small delay due to the stiff buttons, etc., it won't cause any major crashes. If you, however, wanted to run trains on the same line and have the option to go further apart, or even, dare I say it, closer together, I would definitely use the Prodigy, just because of its ease of use. You can use it with one hand, for example. The buttons are far less sensitive, so in the event of an emergency they will react better to you. After controllability, I think one of the most important features for any DCC controller has to be the emergency stop button, because if an accident were to happen that could be prevented, it could be quite an expensive one. On the Gaugemaster, the emergency stop button is this red one here. It's indicated by the word stop, funnily enough. On the Hornby one, it's this giant button here. Now what I tend to find in my use over the years is that with a preventable emergency, it's normally a bit of button bashing. So with the Hornby one, it's literally a case of you slam the big button, everything stops a few seconds later. On the Gaugemaster, due to the controller's light feel and the button being directly behind the main accelerator wheel, it can often be sometimes hard to hit in an emergency or under the panic of one. So they both do the job, but I think the Hornby's one is a better button for its priority use. Showing off the Gaugemaster's emergency stop button now, nervously. I've got this Class 67 zooming towards my station, and of course there's a train in the platform. If I hit the button at the start of the point, a second later the whole thing stops. Really good. One thing that is worth noting, however, with the Prodigy, if I've got the Class 67 selected and I hit the emergency stop button, that one stops, but the rest keep going. Now, that's all well and good, but if you're out and about viewing the layout and you've accidentally put the controller down, or you've got a different loco selected, that will catch you out, especially if it's the wrong loco selected and the rest keep going. Now the emergency stop on the Hornby Select is just the same as the Prodigy. Press the button, instantly stops. The main difference with the Select, of course, 2 locos, press stop, everything stops. which is a far better emergency stop button than just the Loco that's selected on the controller. One quite major flaw with the Prodigy is how it reacts to a cross connection between the positive and negative rails. So for example, just to illustrate, if a train were to touch both sides of the rail on a uninsulated point, for example, what tends to happen is it restarts itself, so hopefully I can illustrate. But it also, as you've noticed, it's reset there, it changed the Loco. What that can sometimes result in is the speed step does carry over. So you could have, obviously this was number 57 a second ago, it's gone over to number 3. Now, my Loco, it's not bound to number 3, but if a Loco was set to that, and the speed step sometimes also stays in, you suddenly get a locomotive career off, and suddenly crash into whatever it's next to. I've had that a couple of times where a Loco's been parked up in my fiddle yard or in my engine sheds on my heritage station, and just ploughed into the next one for no other reason than an engine somewhere has caught both sides on a point. A prime example of what I'm talking about when I say that Locos will just randomly start. As I showed you in the example, I actually shorted out the layout properly so the train stopped. Sometimes if it's only a nanosecond and the train actually with its own momentum carries on, it will literally switch over to another engine starting. Now what we've got here is a quickly averted emergency, but unfortunately I've had to knock my HST off the track. What's happened is I'm running a class 800 which is actually going round on this circuit. The HST, which is sat on the outer line, has just for whatever reason started to turn on, come forward straight onto the main line. Luckily I was filming at the time right on this corner, and you've got the class 800 there. Of course I've hit the emergency stop button, which has stopped the 800, but the HST at full whack was coming this way, so the only option was literally to knock it off the rails in the moment of panic. And of course the controller's there, and like I said, that little red button is very hard to get to when an emergency is there, and it only stopped the 800. So the verdict. Well, as you know, I've used the Hornby Select for the last year and a half. It's an extremely basic controller. It's non-portable. The buttons are quite solid, and sometimes you have to really give them some effort, which isn't the most comfortable of feeling, especially when you want something just to work. However, it's proven itself to be very solid against the Gaugemaster when it comes to things such as an emergency stop. The Gaugemaster itself has a gazillion features. The way you can attach it to a program track out of the box is fantastic, makes it very quick and easy. The buttons are super accessible. It's nice to be able to move around, being portable with the controller compared to the Hornby. And it's very quick and easy to do a lot of things which you can't do easily on the Select. For example, a bit more of an advanced feature. You can't change CVs on the Hornby Select. You'd need the Elite. Price point wise, you can get the Hornby Select from about £70 to £120 online. So quite a chunk of cash. This is new, of course. The Gaugemaster, same again, for about £120 all the way up to £165 at point of filming. So they're roughly you could argue in the same price bracket. Apart from the Hornby, you could probably find cheaper, and then of course second-hand values are relative. For all the advanced features of the Prodigy Express, my big bugbear was its sort of ghosting feature where Locos randomly would just take off. I've never had that with the Hornby Select, and other controllers I've been in contact with, I've never even heard of that as being an issue. Whether it's a problem just on my layout or with this controller or a generic one, I'm not sure, but it's what I've found with this controller. And no matter how good the features on the controller, that's an extremely negative point for me. Because if you have two Locos that smash into each other, each with a value of a couple £100 to replace, and cause some keen damage, it doesn't matter how good the controller is, if you've got to replace a Loco once, you might as well have gone for a different controller. That being said, the Hornby Select is very basic. It's definitely designed to be a beginner controller. It doesn't feel as good a quality, even though it is heavier. It does look like it's mass produced and from the Far East. Now, if I was to pick one of the two, I would probably, just on the out-of-the-box features, have to pick the Gaugemaster Prodigy. Purely because selecting locos, selecting functions, being one-touch, etc., is so much easier than on the Select. The Select, there's so many more processes. You have to press more buttons to get to an answer. So, I would have to pick the Prodigy Express. When I was given this controller, I did blindly think it would be a hands-down win, but I have to be honest, it's definitely a 60-40 split to the Prodigy. A lot of the downside of the Prodigy, as I've mentioned, is the fact that it just starts up Locos, which isn't very safe, and it's not the best by any means, and it's really off-putting, as we've seen. As ever, thank you for watching. Hopefully this has been of interest to someone. It's a bit niche, I'll give you that. We'll see if they want to give me any more after that review, but as ever, I'll leave you with that. Take care now. Bye.